So it's another wet day outside, but inside we're continuing our journey through the New Testament. And today we hit the book of Colossians. In many ways, it's like those letters that we've been exploring over the last few days. There's much here that's similar to Galatians and to Ephesians and to Philippians, things that we'll be familiar with having read those letters. For there's talk about how we're united with Christ in his sufferings, how we're set free from that prison through the cross of Christ and all he has done for us, how Christ is enough for us, how we're called to live in unity with one another, and how we're called to live out our faith. It's all there in Colossians just as much as it is in those other books as well. Now, Colossians wasn't a church that Paul started, that was done by Epaphras, but it's a church he knows about and a church he's excited about as well, as he writes to encourage them. And we're going to come to look at this theme of clothing in a minute, hence the coat hanger. I don't have too many impressive clothes to show you. Well, I've got loads of impressive clothes at church, robes and all that jazz, but not anything here that's that impressive. So the coat hanger will just have to do as an image of how we're clothed with Christ. But before we do that, I just want to look a little bit about how Colossians and Philippians fit together. I see them in some ways, if you like, as two sides of the same coin, and the way in which they focus on different aspects of Jesus and who he is. Of course, in Philippians chapter 2, if you know the letter to the Philippians, you'll be wondering why I missed it out. Why did I miss out that great hymn of humility in praise of Christ's humility? Consider yourself like Christ, who didn't cling to equality with God, but emptied himself and taking the form of a servant. It's a beautiful hymn used to celebrate Christ's humility and how the one who is at the right hand of God steps into the mess of human reality. How the Son of God breaks into our reality in order to change from the inside. And what Colossians does is look at the other side of that, how Jesus, the Son of Man, is the one who is exalted into heaven, the one who was there before the world began, the one who was in all things and through all things, and by whom all things were made, how he is now exalted again into the heavens, supreme and sovereign over all things. It's that Jesus who has worked out our salvation on our behalf, doing that which we were unable to do ourselves, for ourselves, securing our ultimate destiny, securing for us a new reality. Do you see how it works as two sides of the same coin? Kind of in the letter to the Philippians, it's about everything that Christ has left behind in order to come to us. It's about his humility. And here in the letter to the Colossians, it's all about his sovereignty. Who this Christ was that did all of this, who this Christ is again, seated back at the Father's right hand, supreme and sovereign over all things. And in both letters, Paul writes in order that we might be confident about who this Jesus is that we follow, particularly in the midst of difficulties and of sufferings. That we might know that we're not alone, that Christ is with us, he's entered into our reality to be with us, and we might know that ultimately he will triumph over everything that seeks to diminish us, to undermine us, to curtail us, to contain us. Christ has the victory. We have been set free from sin and death, and we will know that freedom in all of its reality in and through Christ because of all that he has done and because of who he is. And that's why Paul encourages the church in Colossae to put on the clothing of Jesus Christ, to share in that salvation and righteousness, to live it out. It's not just something that's in our back pocket, pie in the sky for when we die, a kind of salvation equivalent of a get out of jail card from the game of Monopoly. No, it's something that we live. We're not required to stitch together the clothes, they're given to us by Jesus. All we have to do is put them on and live out the uniform, if you like, the dress that we have been given. To put off the old ways of corruption and wickedness, and instead to put on the robes, to clothe ourselves with compassion and kindness and humility and meekness and patience, not in order to earn something or to try and secure it, but simply as an expression of who we are because of all that Christ has done for us, all that Christ has won for us. Clothes that will never wear out, that will never spoil, because they are those robes of righteousness, not robes we deserve, but robes given to us by Christ as we share in who he is and all that he has done. As Paul writes to a church that's under oppression, under persecution, what a wonderful image that is of being clothed by Christ in these robes of righteousness. It's an invitation to us the same, to live out our calling. And I wonder what image works for you. Paul has written to the Philippians about running a race, to the Colossians about clothing themselves with Christ. I wonder what image might work for you in terms of what it means to live in the relationship which Christ has made possible for us, to live in that relationship with God, with one another, with our sisters and brothers around the world, and to express that wherever Christ has placed us, to run the race, to clothe ourselves with this fruit of the Spirit, to live out those gifts that God has given to us. What image works for you? What would you write to a new believer if you were encouraging them to live out their faith and all that Christ has made possible? Worth reflecting on. But if you need inspiration, come back to these letters of Paul to those early Christians, because there's much there to encourage us about how we are united with this Christ who is humble enough to leave all the glory of heaven behind, and powerful enough, supreme and sovereign enough to secure for us a future we can only begin to imagine. It's all there in the letter to the Colossians.